Right, good evening everyone. By my clock it's 7 o'clock, so I think we'll get going this evening since we've got quite a long agenda. Do we have any apologies for absence tonight? No, I think we're all here.
No, Chair.
Mike?
If I can just give some apologies, I've got to leave early, so I've got a very early start in the morning, so I'll leave at an appropriate moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Item number 2, the minutes of the previous meeting. Are we happy to agree the minutes?
Please agree.
Thank you very much. Just as we move on with the meeting then, I'll just remind everyone that this meeting is being audio recorded and that recording will be available on the Council website. Move then to items of urgent business, and just 2 quick updates from me. The first, I just want to thank Sue. She's been with us as the interim head of Environment Service for a few months now, so really kept the ship afloat in that time, and we wish her well. I think this will be her last meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, although not quite the end of her time here just yet. And with that, we'll welcome Julie to her role as well as Head of Environment, and we hope that we'll be seeing lots of her at this committee over coming months. To move on then, I've also been handed a reminder that a paper was taken to ONS back in March 2016 with regards to the Prevent agenda, and it was agreed then to set up a members' working group to monitor the work that's undertaken according to the Prevent agenda. It was recommended that group should comprise a minimum of 1 member per party. I understand we're still running slightly short of nominees for that group, so what I'd encourage members to do is just after this session, if you could, just email Democratic Services with any kind of nominations if you're willing to be a part of that group, and we'll look to get that set up and moving forward. With that, I'll move on to item number 4, declarations of interest. No declarations, thank you very much. And so we move to item number 5, and that's Clive Webster and Thames 21 presentation. I think a few of us have seen some of the fantastic work that's been undertaken across Thurrock recently, and so I'm very pleased to welcome you here this evening. And so I guess with that, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Oliver. I'm going to stand up and sit down probably at the same time, actually. Firstly, let me say I'm very grateful for you inviting us along this evening. Going to be as brief as possible because we know you've got a very busy schedule online. So what I'm going to firstly do is put into context what we've been doing along the Tilbury and Grays Riverside in the last few months. So I'm going to put down a timeline. October 2014, I became a volunteer river warden for the River Thames Society. They've got 55 wardens that patrol the area from the source to the sea. My particular patch is a Thames Estuary Path, which I'm not sure whether you're familiar with. It runs from Leigh-on-Sea to Tilbury Town, 29 miles. I do it several times a year, and one of the things I'm expected to do is to report anything untoward I see as I'm perambulating around this particular path. So as a result of that, in July 2015 I noticed there were quite large inundations of litter around the Tilbury Power Station section. So I was put in touch with an organisation called Thames 21, and together we began to survey the area around Tilbury Power Station. What that did involve was taking photographs of tides at certain days and times just to monitor how safe it was to get down there, the terrain, walking along there's the vegetation and the type of litter that we were encountering. So once we got a plan together, the first litter took place in October 2015 and yielded 91 sacks of litter. A year later, the 7th one had taken place, and based on that, and with a lot of information to hand, we decided to send an email to Thurrock Council. So what is involved in making a successful riverside litter pick? Well, it's different from an urban pick, because obviously you're dealing with a different topology. So firstly, research the area on foot. Don't just use Google Earth. Actually get down there and walk around and get your nose down into it and find out the issues that are involved. Try not to attempt too much as well. Obviously, you don't want to be too ambitious the first time round, and you don't want to overexert people that have come to do the voluntary services. estimate numbers as much as you possibly can and then plan accordingly in terms of resources availability. Check the tides and weather forecasts. Obviously that's quite sensible, but it's quite fundamental as well. Take expert advice, people walking their dogs, people jogging, people bird watching. Talk to them, find out more about the local area and what bugs them about the litter situation. And finally, on the day itself, when your volunteers are actually there, brief them fully, and that's something that Thames 21 do to a T. All the health and safety issues, they take those on board and make sure that our volunteers go out fully trained and understanding the situation. So the other thing is obviously sensible again, wear suitable clothing. You're working in an exposed area with little shelter, so make sure you wear something waterproof and sturdy footwear as well. Sometimes you get nails in driftwood, you get broken glass, so make sure you've got proper footwear on board. And this just summarises the overall situation regarding the picks that we conducted. And you can see the volunteers, 158 in total. Obviously there's duplication there, but that's how many people came along to these particular picks. 515 sacks of litter, and also on the right hand side the column all the other paraphernalia that came along, as well as the black sacks. So drilling down into the Tilbury 1, 2, 7 and 8, you'll see that from here to the western shoreline by the ferry terminal, there's a bit of shoreline there, then there's the World's End pub, and then there's in front of that, you've got Tilbury Fort, moving around to the sewage works, and then in front of the power station through the jetty and out towards the eastern shoreline. So that's where we concentrated our efforts on picks 1, 4, 1, 2, 7 and 8. The sort of challenges we came across, the remoteness of site, there's no roads really leading there, the shoreline floods at certain times, you're dealing with large quantities of rubbish. You get a 7 metre tide come in and it just goes everywhere, it just spreads itself right the way along the shoreline. We needed the power station to actually come along and hold the litter for us as well. So inside the seawall we threw the sacks in, and then the council came along a few days later and took it away. And obviously you've got large quantities of the flushables, you know, these little cotton buds that people throw away down the toilet. I think that's the last they're going to see of them, but if you walk along the soil line they come back to bite you because there's millions of them there. Bottle tops as well. So this is a picture showing the shoreline in Tilbury before the pick. It looks messy, it's basically flotsam, a lot of this stuff here. And it just gets swept up on the tides and brought up onto the seawall. And here again, this is after the pick. You can see we've managed to clear the area, and then you see these little blue specks here, which are the caps and the cotton buds, which are too numerous to actually pick up individually. Sometimes you just have to take a rain check on certain things that you come across. So then moving on to the Greys litter picks, the graffiti wall. That's a notorious area. It's great for the artists, but they leave all their trash behind, unfortunately. Moving along round Procter & Gamble factories, up to the Sensory Garden and the Wharf Hotel, Grays Beach, and then back along the eastern shoreline to the new power station going up. So that's the areas we covered on those picks. The challenges for Grays, large numbers of volunteers. Now that's not a problem, but obviously if we've got too many people, you have to make sure that they're all calling to the same hymn sheet. Sheer volume of litter, entitled deposits. We had to employ grappling irons to get the trolleys out of the mud. That involved quite a lot of grunt work, as they call it. And then the assistance of the yacht club, they're fantastic. They actually allowed us to use their car park for a briefing session. So this was the situation on one of the Grays litter picks on the beach, and you can see a nice good level of attendance, and Thames 21 in their liveries actually addressing the people at that stage. We had people from Tilbury Riverside, Big Local, River Thames Society, Scout Group, and that went exceedingly well. So this was the Grays Beach before the pick. You don't really want to go down there without gloves and boots on, do you, really? And this was afterwards, and you can just see it's just a complete transformation. You suddenly realise that it's a green area. And this is people from the Phoenix group of Grays who do a fantastic job, just enjoying a cup of tea in the yacht club. So what happened there? 134 sacks, 18 trolleys. Also a bucket where we collected all the broken glass, plastic crates, you name it, we took it out. So what are the challenges on the graffiti wall? Well, here again you talk about quite a remote site. The wall goes on for over a mile in length to Purfleet. You need to get to the St Clement's car park and then walk through a nature reserve before you can get to the litter. You're dealing with toxic materials as well. And you get limited resources. People just generally find it awkward to get to. So that means that much of the pathway remains untouched, unfortunately. So this is one of the shelters before the pick, and they just stacked all the paint cans and trays and whatever, just chucked it in the shelter. I don't know whether they wanted to keep it dry or not, and that was afterwards. So what is my conclusion then about this? Well, I'm assuming that if we're talking about 50 items per sack, there's about 25,000 items we've taken out of the riverside in the last year or so. And as a very broad guesstimate, I'd say that goes 50-50 between the tidal stuff and the domestic stuff. And judging by a quick recce I did on Friday morning, walking around Tilbury and Grays, I expect a similar sort of volume in 2017. So it's definitely not getting easier, not getting better. It's not necessarily getting worse, but that's probably because of the work we did in 2016. If we don't do the same work in 2017, it's going to get a lot worse. So thank you very much. I'd like to now hand over to Emma Harrington, who's going to talk about Thames 21.
Okay, hello. Hi. Right, and this is a continuation of where Clive has set the scene now for the last 12 months of work, and I'm pleased to say that Thames 21 have been able to assist in helping over the last 12 months. I was going to give you a bit of background about who Thames 21 are. We are now 14 years old as a charity, so 12 years old as a charity, but we were set up in 1994 as there was no statutory obligation to clean up the litter that was in the Thames. So we were formed out of Keep Britain Tidy initiative, and we became an organisation in 1998, and we've just grown and grown over the years. And so last year in our annual report we've reported that we've worked with 30,000 participants, and as you can imagine this isn't just on the Thames. Our name was based because we started work on the Thames, but we work on the tributaries, the rivers that join the Thames throughout London. Our vision is about putting healthy rivers at the heart of community life. So as you can imagine, your wonderful frontage that you have on Thurrock, you've got Grays, Tilbury, and also working in Purfleet as well recently. This is exactly the kind of community that we enjoy working with. I'm part of a team of 28 staff, and we work all over London, as I'm saying, and Essex, Surrey, Hertfordshire, so we're not restricted to the Thames. Our areas of focus about working with volunteers to improve the urban waterway environment, and this isn't just about clean-ups, it's actually river enhancements as well. So we work on biodiversity projects, habitat restoration, depends on the site that's available. A large part of what we do is about educating, so we do empower a lot of school children. We work in schools, we have an education centre, so working from the bottom up in ages to involve people. Then we train them as young citizen scientists, as well as taking them out to the river. We also do classroom sessions as well, so really getting to the root of the problem. We also do a lot of gathering data and evidence. We have a Thames River Watch scheme, which is again the citizen science element. We train people in how to test the water quality, and we have a map scheme where we actually monitor the health of the river, and this is a growing scheme. But we're also monitoring the amount of litter, and we've actually got a litter monitoring training. It may sound a bit, why do you need to be trained in how to monitor litter? But it's actually about taking sections and actually counting it over time as well, and seeing what changes and seeing what are the main culprits. We recently produced data to say that I think it was 50 or 60% of the rubbish found is actually food related. So we're actually showing what the sources of litter are. And obviously as we get out and we physically do it, as some of our councillors have joined us as well, thank you, and some of the picks over the year, we know what we're removing and what needs to be taken away. But in addition to that, what we really want to do is we want to advocate, we want to campaign, and this is about changing behaviour. So we do have campaigns. One is the One Less campaign about not using single-use bottles. We're part of a Cleaner Thames campaign, and over the last year we also run something called the Unflushables, which was about exactly the cotton sticks, the cotton bud sticks, and other items which shouldn't be flushed down the toilet because they end up in our rivers and we end up removing them. So it's not just about removing it. We really want to see advocate change and get people involved in changing their home behaviour as well. I've put this in just to give you the enormity of the Thames Basin. So it shows up pretty well. You can see the number of the blue lines. Those are different rivers, different tributaries that all lead into the Thames. And where we are here now, out in the estuary, on one of these last meanders, you get the brunt of what is happening across the Thames Basin. But that doesn't mean also that we can't adapt and influence behaviour within Thurrock itself as well. So we can look at improving your own riverside as well. So there's lots of different catchments to run through, and we work as Thames 21 on a lot of catchment partnerships. Thames 21 have just recently joined the South Essex Catchment Partnership, and and Thurrock is represented on that partnership with other stakeholders, and we're looking at working on the Lower Mardyke, for example. So, fantastic. We're just starting. I went to the Perfleet Community Hub meeting last week to talk to residents there about getting involved. So, that's a tributary into the Thames as well. So it's all very exciting work that we're doing. And just to summarise, Clive's given this up in very good detail. It's been a full-on year of action. Nearly 160 volunteers have been involved. That's a lot of work, removing a lot of rubbish and a lot of litter, big trolleys, and none of this could be done without partnerships. Thurrock Council have kindly removed the majority of the rubbish that Clive described, where we had to leave it, the logistics behind that. But we've also had assistance from the PLA, so the Port of London, also remove the rubbish when they can get in close enough to help us. But the other thing about the partnerships is actually we've linked closely with, I don't want to miss anyone off, Grace Phoenix, the Big Local, Tilbury Riverside, the Hubs, Engage Volunteer Centre. So we're very keen on working locally using existing networks as well, because there's a lot of people out there who want to get involved and we want to work with them. We do want to continue. Do we arrange more cleanups? Thames 21 run a training scheme, or do we work on this behaviour change element as well? So there could be something around working up campaigns, working with schools, scout groups. There, young people and organisations are keen to get involved, and it could be a great way to get more people out and influence what happens locally. Just briefly, Thames 21 does run an accredited training course. So it's a 2-day course. The first day is on the organisation behind all those logistics that we need to think about, the tides, the arranging, the health and safety, and the other one is actually on leadership as well. So we want to establish groups of people who can run their own cleanups. And this is, by being a trained group, you're also covered by our insurance, which is obviously, a great bonus for local authorities as well. I think the key thing here that we want to finish on is that we enjoy working in this area. We've met some fantastic people, fantastically keen people, and we'd like to continue working, but I think it'd be great to be able to talk about how we do that, and what do you think as a council it would be a good way forward. As Clive's just said, he's gone back, and already the work we've done seems undermined by more rubbish coming in domestically as well, not just tidal. So it'd be great to talk to you about this. But thank you very much for your time, and thank you for listening. That's all for us now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in, and I guess on behalf of the committee and our residents as well, sort of thank you for the work that you've done in and around Thurrock, which I think has been absolutely fantastic. There are kind of so many questions that we could kind of jump in. I guess in terms of the point on working with the council, I guess I'd hope that there are those relationships there that certainly at an officer level we can continue those conversations and make sure that in terms of the planning that we do, that relationship grows and is embedded. But I guess I wanted to turn the question around to you a little bit in a sense and ask kind of, what could we as a council kind of best do in terms of this area and working with you, and where do you see we can kind of be most help and support?
I'd like to see some people employed by the council actually down on the riverside monitoring the situation, reporting on things, activities, illegal tipping, that sort of thing, so that we've actually got somebody on the ground there, rather than people like myself coming up from Lee and doing it on the odd day, people down there having a presence to be able to report on anything that they find unacceptable.
Thanks very much. So that's kind of developing that network of kind of intelligence that we can kind of work more closely on. That's great. I'm sure the officers will kind of listen to that and think about ways that we could work within that framework. And I guess the other question, just quickly as well, is then in terms of kind of our local residents and getting involved. If they do want to get involved, what's the best way of them doing that?
There are existing groups like Tilbury Riverside who I think they're evolving into other avenues, but Grace Phoenix do a lot, and over our last year of working we've found people that do want to do the training, so they are keen, especially around the Grays Beach area near the yacht club. So we are happy to invest our time in training residents, and the more that can come along the better, so we can advertise that as something locally. I mean, I think this is something we need to work as well, is actually, are we going to continue this? Do we want to continue coming back and setting up more clean-ups? We could set a year plan. As mistakenly, we arranged the last one on Remembrance Sunday, so we didn't get a good turnout. That was, but next time we'll plan our calendars a bit better. But that was around the tides. It was a good tide. So I think it's a case of we'd like to do more. And I know volunteering, the Engage Centre as well, they do various bits and pieces, so we can set more clean-ups up.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else want to come in on this? Roy?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your report and a fantastic job in which you are doing. I'm always keen to ask what response do you get when you go around to schools? Because I've always been saying this is where we've got to go into the schools to make them aware this is the environment in which you live. Be responsible and respectful for that environment. What sort of response do the children come out when you point all this rubbish, and this is what comes out when you, as you say, if you put it down the sink or wherever? Thank you.
Yeah, as you can imagine, children, young people, they are fascinated by what they do find and what they can get involved with. A lot of the sessions we run are around the water cycle as well, so everything that influences, as well as the flow of where litter comes from. We hope that children and young people are going home and they're influencing to their families and their guardians who they live with. But I think it's also, older age groups need to get involved in this as well to change behaviour, because it is right about teaching the younger generation, and there's a fascination, but how much they can relate that when they do go home, we don't monitor that. So, yeah.
Gary.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd just like to echo the sentiments of this committee about what a great job you're doing, and long may it continue. I was actually sort of quite interested about the water sampling you mentioned. You take samples of the water. Who actually analyses it, and can you give us an idea of what the water quality is like of the Thames? Has it improved or kept the same or declined over these years? Thank you.
Yeah, our citizen scientists, we train them in a training room, and we train them how to, other than looking at the tide times and the best time to go out and physically do water quality tests, we train them in how to measure the temperature, the turbidity, the phosphorus, and 2 other chemicals as well. So we can actually train them, and we give them the kits. So we've had as a charity, we have to, we rely on funding pots. So we've had funding to be able to establish this as a scheme. And so now our Thames River Watch volunteers are trained, and they are dotted up and down the Thames, and they feed their information that they find themselves. So this is the beauty of citizen scientists. It's down to the individuals who volunteer to go out, do the work. They take their scientific readings, and then they put them into the website that we use. And there Thames the Health is getting better. It is improving. More needs to be done. The Thames Tideway tunnel will make a big influence, big change to kind of more, I suppose, the more central parts of the Thames going through the city. But the rivers will still influence it as they bring in, that Thames Basin map. If you can imagine the agricultural runoff that can come in through the basin. So it is improving. I think there's a big awareness, and there's a lot of awareness at the moment, isn't there, about plastic in the oceans, in the rivers, in the system. So it's more can still be done, though.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd be remiss if I didn't congratulate you both as well. A couple of things that you mentioned about how we could help, and one was about local groups getting involved, and how we can prevent the build-up of litter after you've done a clean-up. And just a couple of points that we can possibly make where we can help is that, Clive, you speak about someone employed by the council that, could monitor the situation, but quite often the best people to monitor it are the local residents that are really concerned about it. And possibly what we could do is actually have some sort of hotline, or we've got the report it mechanism on the council website, whereby we can have something specific around litter along where local residents can highlight it. So they're likely to be possibly more concerned than someone that's just paid to walk along occasionally.
Can I just say, sorry?
Yeah.
I think parts of the areas that we're talking about where a lot of litter is building up is unseen to the public.
Right.
It's down on the lower shoreline area, particularly around Tilbury Power Station. You get very few people, actually residents, walking along those areas.
Right, well, it's something we could look at, but I say for everywhere else rather than you say Lee. And the other thing is, and it's on the agenda tonight, and I think it started on the 5th, which was yesterday. Thurrock Council have now got some enforcement team officers for littering. Now I know there's defined areas at the very onset that they're going to be concentrating on. But it may be possible that we could utilise the enforcement team, or one of them, to look at targeting areas where food, packaging and waste is most relevant, because that may go some way to help in the situation as well.
Can I just ask on that, just with your enforcement team, are they about, are they like wardens where they notify it, or is there some action put in place to actually remove it as well? How does the...
Steve or Julie, do you want to come back on that one?
The enforcement resource that we've got in is about, it's a deterrent, but it's about issuing FPNs to those that are littering. The collection of waste and litter is a role for the street cleaners as they go around the borough.
Good evening again, and I'd just like to say I've helped out on occasions with Thames 21, and it was very, very good, very, very rewarding. Met some lovely people, and it was a very rewarding day. One of the other hats I've worn in the past, I've been an unpaid work supervisor for Kent and Surrey Probation Service. And is it anything we've ever considered working with the Probation Service in Essex to assist?
We did for the particular bit that you attended. Unfortunately, it didn't happen for various reasons. We had a contact, we rang them, and then we missed them, and then they rang us back and we missed that call. And it never actually happened within the time frame. But I think we've still got the contact people in Basildon, I think it was, probationary services. So we can certainly address that in future peaks.
They're definitely interested. They would come out, and there is an issue there about if we want to involve local residents, and then you have a probation team coming out. It's how much can you actually enthuse people to come out when they see it as a punishment, if you like, for as a probation team. So, I mean, if it's a way to remove litter, it can be considered, and they are interested to come out. So it's just the kind of like the image we would portray.
I think it would be very positive because I said as a volunteer myself I found it very rewarding, and the people on their probation service doing their unpaid work would, working with decent people, to use an expression, it would help them as well. It really would. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So further question for me, and I think the council are probably kind of, and we on this committee are well aligned with your kind of point that actually it's as much about changing future behaviours and attitudes as it is dealing with the kind of the problem that's kind of immediately in front of us. So when you're kind of tackling that aspect of things, I'm kind of keen to understand, are there particular schemes that you run on that at the moment? I mean, is there any kind of working with the council at the moment, or perhaps any opportunity to tie up working with the council?
So is that in relation to setting up or training?
Sorry, but either in terms of setting up or training, but with regard to the kind of the prevention and kind of changing attitude side rather than the clear-ups.
I think the campaigns would be the way to link in. I know some people have mentioned already that it's the Keep Britain Tidy have got their Great Spring Clean happening. It's all booked in for dates in March again, and we're planning on a big national waterways clean-up again later in the year, linking it with Totally Thames. So there are campaigns which we can build up and around, or do we set up a Grays and Thurrock Thameside campaign? It's something that is out there for discussion, and if it's a way to interact and really get people involved, I think there's a lot of keen people in the area who might like to. Yeah.
Steve?
Thank you. I think the campaigns is something we should try and synchronise together. We've had a Bin It campaign, as members will know. I think it's been quite successful over the autumn. Why shouldn't we extend that and broaden it to specifically target the foreshore in conjunction with yourselves and others? I think we should have a look at that if members would like us to.
Prioritise the actual pick itself, because there's lots of pockets of litter all the way along for several miles, and we can probably only do one or two areas at a time when we have a particular day indented. You can't spread your resources too far along the shoreline, so we need to be quite specific about where we're actually going to do it.
Can I ask a question as well? I was intrigued by the map and I had this vision of all the litter being put into rivers all around the southeast and ending up on the foreshore in Thurrock. I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but I think you said 50-50 was the split between tidal sort of deposits and littering. Is that the case in Tilbury and in Grays and in other parts of the foreshore? Does it vary from place to place? So I think when we do a campaign, it might be a different type of campaign focused on don't litter in Thurrock as opposed to tidal litter that comes from other places, that the campaign might be about come and help pick it up, as well as don't put things down the toilet that you should.
I think both things could need to be tied in together to improve the local environment for Thurrock, I think, yeah.
Great, thanks very much. If no one else has any other kind of questions, I'll just say thank you so much for coming this evening and presenting to us. I think we all found it really interesting and enlightening in terms of the work that you do and in terms of some of the opportunities that we've got for the future, and hopefully we can kind of really kind of strengthen that working relationship between the council and yourselves. So thank you very much. And if we just take a minute just to let you kind of pack up and leave the meeting, then we'll move on.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, we move on then to item number 6, and the Grays Beach report is at page 41 on the agendas.
Thank you, good evening. We've been asked to obviously bring a report to overview and scrutiny, just to give a bit of background to the ongoings of the flooding that took place down at Grays Beach in the summer. We've got there's a list of the key dates that are in the report, but I won't go through sort of every single date. But it's important to add that there's a catalogue of dates and meetings that we had with colleagues from Anglian Water throughout the summer with regards to the flooding that occurred from the culvert, which is referred to as Drums Culvert at the end of Thames Road. Initially, it had been assumed that the flooding was caused by fly tipping, actually in the Drums Culvert, but following further investigations, it was obviously seen that there were defects with seaward side valves out on the seawall. In fairness to colleagues from Anglian Water, I think they did a lot of work up to the point that they could before they were able to get a marine management organisation licence for the work that was required on the seaward side. There was a hold up with the guys from Anglian Water being able to get that. So the council added some weight to the pursuing of that licence with myself and Steve Cox meeting with colleagues from Anglian Water and actually writing to the MMO and the Port of London, the port authorities to get that clearance so that the guys could get out onto the seawall side to actually do the main part of the works. We've got a brief listing of the work that is actually now taking place. And in fairness, it is to say it is fairly significant civil engineering on the seawall side, and really it's just an opportunity. It is important to obviously say that we've got now good lines of communication with colleagues in Anglian Water, so that obviously we can hope there is no similar reoccurrence. But it's important to put in place to say that we've actually got those lines of communication in place with colleagues from Anglian Water, and obviously following the works that have now been completed, we have had no further reoccurrence, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much for the report. I think it's pretty comprehensive in terms of the ground that it covers, and I guess first of all, it is some reassurance as members to see that action now has been taken by Anglian Water around the works as you mention. Just quickly before I kind of open it up, then, should we have confidence as members that this, first of all, is pretty unlikely now to reoccur on the same site, but also do we know of any other kind of similarly at-risk sites across Thurrock that maybe we should keep an eye on?
In terms of a reoccurrence, I've been involved with parks management at the council, and predominantly with Grays Beach for nearly 20 years, believe it or not, and we've never had any issues with regards to flooding at Grays Beach. So, in that sense, I was most surprised when it occurred, and I can only say that obviously the work that Anglian Water have now done, it gives me some personal reassurance that I don't suspect that it will happen again. A lot of the works that they've put in place are in effect sort of secondary and third level fail safes that were defective at the time. So as far as I can say, I don't think there'll be any recurrence.
All right, thank you, Chair. I just wondered, apart from obviously there was breakdowns in regards to brackets and things like this on the outflows, but part of the issues were the build-up of fly tip, the Drums Culvert. So has measures been put in place to make sure that we can't have a build-up of materials there? I know the repairs are okay now, but we don't want to build up with rubbish that can eventually maybe cause problems in the future. Thank you.
I agree absolutely. I mean, it is important to add that obviously that Drums Culvert is it's solely the responsibility of Anglian Water. It is their responsibility to to maintain it. But we will actively monitor the situation in terms of detritus build up and fly tipping in the area. So with the communication in place with colleagues at Anglian Water, if that were to be the case, we can certainly make them aware.
Yeah, 3.4.1, the tidal flap. Could you explain to members what the purpose of this tidal flap is? Is it to stop water from coming in, or is it for water to go out?
You have to excuse me. I'm no civil engineering or marine expert, but I fast became so in the summer. It's predominantly to prevent seawater entering the facility, coming in off of the Thames, going into the culvert, and then obviously reaching into Grays Beach Riverside Park. The fact that there now, I think, the initial seaward side flap has been replaced. There's a secondary fail-safe inside that valve that's been replaced, and Anglian Water have also replaced the flap valve on the outfall from Grays Beach. So there's in effect now, three flap valves preventing water going back towards Grays Beach.
Gary, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, and it was very clear and concise. The thing that stood out to me was that a lot of time was lost trying to get the right people at the right place with the right qualifications, especially the marine management licence, and these things happen. I'm just more concerned about what lessons we've learned. So if we ever have the unfortunate event of occurring somewhere else in the borough, will we be able to have we got systems in place now, people we know we can go to get a faster response, please?
Yes, I think we have, in terms of direct colleagues with Anglian Water, and Steve has certainly made sure that will be the case as well. So they're the key players that we need to have on board, so that if there was ever a recurrence, not here but elsewhere in the borough, because I know that other areas were discussed as well, we can speak directly to those people as opposed to having to go through the Anglian Water call centres, etc., etc.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, just following on from that point, I noticed the first time that it was noticed that you would want a MMO was on the 29th of July. It says that they were working on the 21st of October, and that they'd responded very shortly after getting the MMO, which indicates to me there was at least a 10-week wait for this MMO. I know in your last response you mentioned that you'd now had good contacts with Anglian Water, but have we looked at the Port of London Authority and how we can speed up the M&O? Because it looked like they must have applied for it very early on, but in actual fact it was the PLA that was dragging its feet. So have they got a standard that they should hit, or is there something we can do, following on from Councillor Collins' point, so that should it happen in the future, we don't have to hang about for 10 weeks for someone to give us the okay to fix a flap that's causing us lots of problems?
Steve, did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, thanks. I think the lesson that we'll learn from this is that we should be writing to the MMO and the Port of London Authority and not relying on Anglian Water to make the contact. I think we probably assumed there was an established dialogue and there was a process to go through. Actually, if we put the pressure on, it can happen a bit quicker than it did. And I think once we wrote a letter, the response was actually very quick. So I think we've learnt that lesson, I think. And just to add another point about one of the failings I think Anglian Water would acknowledge, there wasn't a proper inspection and maintenance regime in place, otherwise they would have spotted some of these flaps breaking and so forth. So in addition to the improvements and the new equipment down there that they've put in, they are committed to an inspection and maintenance regime, I think on an annual basis, to make sure that if there are any problems or even build-up of litter or fly tipping, as well as the new flaps that are there, that they can spot it and deal with it to prevent it happening in the future.
Thanks very much. If there are no other comments, then the recommendations are just that the report be noted. Are you happy to agree that? Thank you very much. I just thank Luke for the report, which I think is very useful, and I think we all have confidence that we've drawn the right lessons from the incident. So thank you very much. The next item is item number 7, the Active Place Strategy Update at page 47, and I think this is there we go. Grant to introduce that.
Lovely, thank you very much. Good evening. Yes, this item is to provide an update on the ongoing work of developing an active place strategy for Thurrock. By way of introduction to the item, the active place strategy will be made up of 4 key strands, 4 main themes. Firstly, the indoor sports facility strategy, which will look at the swimming pool provision, indoor sports halls, etc. The outdoor sports provision, which is around the outdoor sports pitches, football, rugby, netball, tennis, etc. Our open space and play areas, and then our active travel. Those 4 strands will come together under an overarching active place strategy, which will pull together the main themes from those works and opportunities between the 4 areas. So within the report, section 2.3 shows the purpose of the strategy, which is around assessing the supply and demand and accessibility of facilities, planning appropriately for future new sport, recreation and open space facilities, justifying within the local plan what these standards are and making sure that they're robust. Directing the spend of Section 106 or SIL money in the future, and identify opportunities for external funding for developing those future facilities. Section 2.4 talks about the fact we've now got early draft reports in place for indoor sports, outdoor sports and open space. And the findings of those are shown within Section 3 under the issues and options. So Section 3 provides a summary of those findings from those reports, with 3.1 providing a summary of the indoor sport and needs assessment. And in summary, that says that our sports and leisure facilities are ageing, and we need to look at new facilities and how we're going to provide those for the future and how they can meet modern day demands and the expectations of our residents. And in terms of the sports halls, all of our sports halls are actually in education establishments, which does provide an issue around accessibility during the day, holidays, etc. And again, some of those are in quite poor condition, and we need to be looking at the provision of those going forward. Section 3.10 provides an assessment of the outdoor sports on a sports by sport basis, and the findings of that are shown in Appendix A on a sport by sport basis. And then on to Section 319, that's the summary of the open space areas, and the assessment essentially is showing that currently we've got it's about right. The headline figure is that we're considered to have a significant amount of open space at the moment. However, with future development, that will need looking at, and there's likely to be future need around the open space and outdoor areas. And then in terms of the next steps, more detailed work will be developed on this after the local plan's been discussed and the issues and options discussed in March and agreed by Council, so we know where the local plan's going and we can develop the facility stock in and around what that's likely to mean for the borough. And just lastly, just to say that as those strategies evolve, they'll come back to the relevant overview and scrutiny panels for some full and proper discussion. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that. And I certainly kind of welcome this report and the progress that's being made. I'm just going to ask one question and then open it up to the committee. And it was your point particularly around the open space assessment and the progress of the local plan. I think for one reason or another, I think residents are rightly very protective of their open spaces, certainly in my ward, and I would imagine for the other areas as well. And I think we are all quite keen to guard those open spaces as the local plan progresses, and to make sure that we do have those kind of safeguarded for the future. I guess what I'm after is just a little bit of commentary in terms of how we make sure through that local plan process that we protect those open spaces for residents, and to make sure that as new developments come forward, we do have the adequate amount of open space, so that we can enjoy that on new developments as well as in existing areas of the borough.
Yeah, I think the local plan is running through its course at the moment. The issues and options consultation document will be going through hopefully February, March time, early spring. One of the key, precise detail of the precise policy, but one of the key issues in there will be maintaining open space across the borough to standards that enable people to access open space within a reasonable time period of travel, and that goes for space within the urban environment as well as space in the greenbelt.
Thank you. We'll take Terry first, and then come back to Russell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure some of the other members of the committee are going to bring things up about athletics and gymnastics. I'd like to concentrate in this stage on there's nothing in the report regarding outdoor sport which isn't recognised in Thurrock at the moment. When I say that, there's no facility for it, and that's somewhere for off-road bikes and scramblers to go. It's a major problem that's been hitting Thurrock for, probably 10 or 12 years. Well before I became a councillor, I was trying to get something done about it. In this year alone, over in one particular area of Thurrock where it's rampant at the moment, there's been 2 very serious accidents and 1 fatality, and that's in the last 6 months. I'd like to see, and we've had discussions with the police who are on board with it. Jim's been involved with those conversations as well, and other senior officers. I'd like to see included in the active strategy is for the council to look at a suitable place for an off-road for bike or the scramble track to be identified and put forward in the local plan. I'm sure there must be somewhere that we can find. As I say, it's been going on for 10 years, and we need to be able to put something somewhere that they use. The police have said they will actively direct them to there. Wickford used to have a place that the police actually used to give out tickets to go and sample it. So it's something I'd very much like to see in there. And I say discussions with the police and other officers at the council, it's something that they think it's about time we looked at. And it could also be a financial, someone might be interested in making it on as a commercial basis, because I think Lydd is the closest, like, officially known track, so it could be that it doesn't have to be small, it could actually be a big development opportunity.
Thank you. Yes, I'll happily take that on board and have a look at that. It's been a few years since I've looked at this issue, and when we last looked at it, some of the issues were that the type of people that were hurtling across the local playing field on their bike weren't necessarily the people that would have a bike that was fit to be put in an organised facility, wouldn't have access to that facility via a trailer or something to get their bike there, unlikely to wear the helmet and the protective clothing. And there are obstacles, I'm not saying they're unsurmountable obstacles, and it is something we'll happily look at, because somebody must, if somebody solved this problem, let's look at it and see what can be done.
Just to give you some update on the situation at the present, Grant, there's people travelling down in vans from Suffolk up from Kent, and that's just to this one particular venue. There's about a dozen vans parked up every weekend at this particular spot, so it's just the fact they need somewhere to go, because they're travelling in from outside the area, so we need to stop that.
Thank you. Just to say that following Councillor Nicola's interventions on this stuff, we have actually lodged that with planning, who are looking at the possibility of identifying a site, so that we at least flag that up with them as an issue. and we'll just see how successful they are in finding somewhere. But I couldn't agree more with your comments.
Thanks very much. I think I had Russell coming in next.
Thank you for your report. Two things that are quite close to myself are footpaths in Thurrock. I enjoy walking the footpaths and hope to get to become overgrown, opened up, especially since we'll have this new development over at Stanford La Hope as a country park. So walking from Chapel St Mary, hopefully it'll connect with that country park and go on to the RSPB sanctuary over at Mucking and join the Thames footpath. So keeping the footpaths open and usable, and whilst we've mentioned the motorbikes, keeping them off of the footpaths because they tend to get on there and they cause problems to people walking, quite dangerous. The other thing that's very close to me in the Chapel St Mary area is, and it's not been mentioned in your sports at all, is boxing. We've got a very thriving, successful boxing club that is struggling to keep itself going. And is it something where the council, I think they've just renewed their lease with the council after quite a lot of deliberation, but is it something where the council might support something like a local boxing club, because they do represent Thurrock all across the country and they are quite successful.
Thanks. Do you want to come back on that one?
Yeah, obviously I don't know the detail of the boxing club, but there is locally there's a sports council which ironically have got a meeting this evening which I'll be going to afterwards, and they're doing sessions on tonight. The sessions on fundraising and how clubs can access any external funding, etc. And I'd be more than happy to put that club in contact with the sports council so that they can talk to those and get some information from them. In terms of supporting the boxing club, I think it's there used to be the Amateur Boys Boxing Association, which used to be the natural support mechanism for those organisations, and I would assume that they were tied into that. But again, if the person, if we've got a contact, I'm happy to have a chat to them to see if there's anything we could do that we're not doing, or if I can point them in any direction that could help them.
That would be great. Perhaps we can speak afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I spent a lot of time reading this report, and there's an awful lot in there which I wish I could sort of go through with you. I'm just going to have to pick one thing, the one thing actually stuck out with me, and I've got to say that once upon a time I was younger, thinner, and had more hair. I used to be a Thurrock Harrier, and it's a bit of a surprise to see that the 25-year lease is coming to an end. Are there likely to be any problems extending the lease? I'd hate to see it go. Thank you.
No, the council are actively working with the Harriers on renewing their lease and finding some terms that are acceptable to both the council and the Harriers. I think there is a bigger issue for the whole of Blackshot's site in the future to look at how that's designed, laid out and orientated, and what the future of that site. So we're talking about sort of, if we're talking about 10, 20 years time, what Blackshot's could and should look like. The existing swimming pool and civic hall is 50 years old. There's various outbuildings that are past their best, should we say, and quite appalling in some areas. We've got the Harriers one side, the rugby club, and we probably need to take a fresh look at that whole site. But certainly there's every intention to support the athletics going forward.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. If there aren't any other questions, we'll take Roy and then Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Many thanks for your report. I just wondered, what more can we do to encourage communities to, as it says here, transfer assets to charities? For example, Hardy Park, there's a good that ground there. They took that over, and they're basically running a thriving area there for community. So what more could we do to encourage communities to do this? And if I just follow on, it's only part, what measures are being put in place, or what can we put in place to try and look to the future for the swimming pools? Because as you just rightly mentioned, they are ageing, and we need to do something or start. Thank you.
Okay, Thank you. Well, as far as the community running the facilities, I think Thurrock's got quite a long history and proud history of clubs that have been doing that for years. Most football club, bowls club, cricket club pretty much manage their own sites anyway, and sport is only ever been developed on the basis of volunteers and people volunteering within sport. Now, obviously, more recently, parks groups are being set up and follow a similar model. And I think, as with any volunteering opportunity, volunteers need support as well. The thought that you can basically just give something to the volunteers and everybody be happy, I think, is probably not correct. It's not sustainable and it hasn't got a long-term future. We need to work closely with volunteers to make that transition as easy as possible to move from local authority management to voluntary management, and every case is slightly different because the individuals have got different needs, wants and requirements, and it does get quite complex because I'm not talking about Harley Park, but in some instances you'll talk to an interest group and it might be a club that are passionate about cricket, but as the project develops, you realise that they're excluding other people from using a park, or footballers that have been inconsiderate of other users. So it's trying to get a balanced view as well. I believe the council launched a community asset transfer policy earlier in the year, which provides the guidance for how to do that. But I just think it's a question of support working together and being quite realistic about what it is you want to achieve and if you can achieve it.
Thanks very much.
Sorry, in terms of the swimming pool issues, now that's a big issue, that is. We've got our main swimming pool at Blackshots is 50 years old. The two district pools, Bellis and Corringham, they're 40 years old. They've actually, if you go into the buildings, you'll be quite surprised at how, considering their age, how quite good look they look. But some of the pools from the outside, they don't look their best, and they're certainly not the sort of facility that would encourage a family to see it and say, great, let's go to that facility. Swimming pools are very expensive to build. A standard swimming pool these days with a sports hall and a fitness facility, we're talking about £15 million for a 25 metre 6-lane pool. So it is a big investment. I think we need to, I don't know the answer to that, how we're going to fund it, but in the first instance we need to know what we want and what our aspiration is so that we can start building that up and working that through.
Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, I think Roy has already mentioned part of my question on 3.6. I'm quite alarmed at in the document you say that Thurrock is in urgent need of swimming pools, and also without investment within the new facilities that we could be left with no pools at all. Is that no pools in the whole of Thurrock?
Yes, but I think we're talking about the life of the plan is to 2035, so we're talking about in the long term. If we don't start doing something now and plan for the next 10 years, 10, 20 years, then we will be put in that situation. I mean, swimming's one of the most popular sports in Thurrock. It appeals to young, old alike. It's excellent for health benefits. It's quick, it's convenient. It ticks all the boxes, and certainly something we would want to continue to promote and develop.
Thanks very much. I think Steve wanted to come in on this one as well.
Yeah, thanks. It was a broader point really, and it's alluded to by the question. This is an excellent evidence base. It's a strong starting point when we're looking forward to how we want to see sport and leisure provision across the borough. I think there's a real opportunity to make a step change. So we're not talking about swimming pools that are fading and leisure centres that need to be upgraded. We're actually talking about something that's right for Thurrock. It's bigger, it's bolder, and it fits in with our agenda around health, healthier lifestyles. We need to create, I think, a step change in the quality of sports provision, leisure provision across the borough. I think we can do that from this base. The local plan is one route that we can take, so there's land use implications from what we want to try and achieve. But I think as said in the report, we need to bring something back to this committee which is starting to paint that picture about how we want to address this particular issue going forward. And I think it's a really exciting opportunity, actually. I really do. There's just one point that wasn't answered, I don't think, on the public rights of way, the walking routes. Paragraph 2.5, I think, commits to a review of public rights of way as a way of addressing that particular issue and looking at opportunities to create the sort of footpaths that you were talking about, Councillor.
Thanks very much. So I think if I can summarise then, I think we'll welcome the kind of the evidence base that we've got here and the work that's been done so far, and I think we'd all agree with Steve's point there as well, that actually high aspirations for sporting provision in Thurrock are really important here, and that we would need to be aiming high in terms of what we might be able to work on and deliver in the future. And so I think we would all welcome this report and the next steps that we take in that process. And with that, is everyone happy to agree recommendation at 1.1 to note the report?
Yes, great.
Thank you very much. And as we go through the agenda tonight, if officers do want to leave, please feel kind of free to step out. Don't feel that you have to stay all the way until item number 12 on the agenda if your part's done. So thank you. Moving on then to item number 8, responding to unauthorised traveller encampments in Thurrock, and I think we hand over to Jim on this one.
Thank you, Chair. The paper is as it is, and I was going to go through it very speedily just so that members could respond with any issues they wanted to raise. Beginning by saying, obviously, we know how much of an impact this does make on local residents' lives, and it generates an awful lot of anxiety. And it's important that we're able to demonstrate that we're doing the best we can to minimise the number, and when we have them, to be most effective in terms of getting them moved on. The figures that I set out in section 2 would suggest that actually we're looking at a really significant increase in unauthorised encampments. What's actually happened is the figures for 16-17, as you can see, are the half-year figures. There is a seasonality around these encampments, or at least there has been in the past. Last year that wasn't the case, but it is true now, this year, that the numbers of encampments throughout the county, as well as in Thurrock, have significantly reduced since September. There's a couple of reasons for that, and I can go into those. So there's some reason to suspect that actually if there is a level of increase, it won't be as spectacular as I've suggested. I also refer then to the work of the Essex County-wide Traveller Unit. I know members will be familiar with that work, and they give us an excellent service. And at 2.4, I'd give the details about the subscription of £6,400, and I think that's a bargain from our perspective when you look at the actual costs of an encampment eviction. I also include at the back in Appendix 1 the time frame. I know some members will have seen that already, but it actually does identify the stages that have to go through to comply with the legislation, which is baffling. I know sometimes when you try to explain to residents actually why this has to happen, and the time frames only take account of working days. However, it is true that they have a target of getting all unauthorised encampments moved within 10 working days. They've hit that 100% for us, and they've about 80 to 90% of encampments are moved within 7 working days. It's reassuring when I get anxious phone calls from members of the public about these encampments to be able to give them those sorts of figures, because I think most members of the public that ring up are wanting to know, A, that we know about the encampment, B, that something's being done about it, and C, that there is some indication of when they'll be moved. And we are able to do that thanks to the work of the ECTU. On section, I then talk about the police use of section 61. This is their power to move encampments without having to go through the process that the ECTU have to go through. And what's happened this year, because the first 6 months were particularly busy, there has been a far more robust response by police to using section 61 within the constraints of the legislation and the criteria that I've identified there. And that has had a significant impact on the numbers of unauthorised encampments. We do have one particular family group who are responsible for about 40% of our encampments, and they've gone. There's 2 more groups around Essex who are responsible for a significant number, and they've left as well. So we draw some comfort from that. There's other stuff the ECTU do in terms of private land encampments, because we don't have responsibility for that, and they are looking to maybe be able to provide us a service to actually take that job on for local landowners. The question is pricing it up. They're looking at about £1,000 a go, but there's an awful lot of work yet to be done before they can do that. At 2.10, I talk about the costs that do fall to us in terms of site clearance, and you will see the figures there, and also the work that has already taken place in terms of target hardening. And that has met with some considerable success, I have to say, because what has been the case is that some of the persistent travellers have been going from one place to another place and back again. The orders, when we get them from court, have a 3-month lifespan in regard to the individuals named on it or identified on it. So anything we can do to prevent them physically from accessing these sites is very, very, very important to us. I then talk about what's happening in terms of national good practice and the powers that exist, and if I could just take a moment at 3.2, just set out the 4 issues that we're looking to exploit to make Thurrock a much less attractive place for travellers. The first one is in terms of recovering the court costs. You'll see that the actual charges for getting a repossession order about £250 a go. What I've been pushing colleagues in ECTU to do is to apply for court costs, very standard process in other cases. Not that we in Thurrock would get that money back, because that would go back to the ECTU. My thinking is that if we can actually start to make that a bit of an issue for travellers, and if they fail to pay that, and I think there's a likelihood in some cases that would be the case, we can then look to get bailiffs to enforce that. There are restrictions, as we know, of what bailiffs can actually take, but that might have some impact in terms of deterring them coming to us. The public space protection orders, I know members are familiar with these, which are available to the council to impose, and we could look at some of those. I refer to them as iconic sites, but like Kilvert's Field, which had a terrible summer, we could actually look to maybe do that, so that any breaches would be met with FPN, fixed penalty notices. There are some logistical issues around that. I wouldn't want to say we can definitely do that and we can definitely start it tomorrow, but it's something we're looking to do. The injunctions issue is one that I know that members will be very aware of. The injunction that Harlow secured, which is an 18-month injunction at some substantial cost, I must say. We've retained the barrister that obtained that injunction for Harlow, and we're looking with her to see whether there's something we could be doing locally on a much more appropriate to our problems scale. And so that's work that's very much in advance now. And I also refer to further opportunities for target hardening. So I'm sorry I've gone through that at some speed. It's a subject I know members are very familiar with, and obviously the impact it has. But I hope that's been a helpful introduction to the paper.
Thanks very much for that, Jim. And certainly as chair of the committee, I welcome all of those measures that are coming forward and the work that's being done. I'm going to hand out, I think in the interest of time, I'm going to come straight to the committee and we'll put some of those questions. So I'll take Russell first.
Thank you, Jim, for your report. One of the things you didn't mention, which the public are rather concerned about, is monitoring of these people when they move onto the land, because they'll move onto the land. And I'll just use Chadwell St Mary, Chadwell Hill as an example, which costs over £6,000, I was told, to clean afterwards. They start filling the field up with rubbish on a daily basis. Now, the public are driving past, seeing this happening, and not seeing us do anything about this. And then they see them go. They just, they're gone, and all the rubbish is there, and it's for us to pick up the cost. Now, I don't think we're doing a very good job to allow them to get away with dumping on a daily basis. And the families you've mentioned have gone, but I will take a little side bet with you now, sir, that they'll be back again next year. And because this time of the year is cold, they return to their homes. I understand some of these people have homes in Ireland, Southern Ireland, very expensive homes, and they make their money by coming to the UK, and they get away with it time and time again. And I think it's time now that those iconic sites that you mentioned are properly hardened so they can't come to them, and when they get kicked off of one, they immediately go on to another. because that's what happens as well. We move them from one site and we don't monitor where they go to next, and they move on to another site in Thurrock, and it happens time and time again, and that is what the public tell me they're getting sick of. Thank you.
Thank you. I absolutely understand that point. The benefit of the injunction that I referred to was that when this particular family group return, we will have in place that injunction. That's our intention anyway. And so if they breach that, then of course they'll be taken before the court, and there'll be punitive penalties available to the court. In terms of the process whereby the travellers will arrive on an unauthorised encampment and then start fly tipping on the, I totally get that. The response to that is a bit of a challenge for us right now, and that's something that, again, the ECTU are doing on our behalf. But that's not a 24-hour service, so these fly tips, etc., can appear overnight, as we know. It's difficult to know quite how best to respond to that. I absolutely understand the point. The speed with which they get moved is, I suppose, the most practical way to actually prevent them being left in the condition they are left in. Some are left in reasonable condition, some of the sites, I have to say, but others clearly not, and the example you gave is a bad example of exactly that problem. In terms of actually detecting the fly tipping, I suppose that unless we catch people in the act, it's difficult to actually identify who's been responsible for what. But what is true now is the police, as I mentioned with their use of Section 61, whereas before they would say if a security gate or a lock had been broken or damaged to gain access, the previous response has been a little bit, well, we can't prove who did it, so we can't do anything about it. The attitude now very much is, if that's been done, they're all culpable, so they'll all get moved. I'm not sure we can actually apply that quite that way in terms of fly tipping, but I know that's something that we're looking at across the county, and the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner is chairing a task and finish group to address this specific point and others in regards to these unauthorised encampments. But I will take that on again and ask if there is advice we can get either from the rest of the county or elsewhere as to what we can do.
We spend inordinate expense on trying to detect fly tipping when it's done at 3 o'clock in the morning in one of our country lanes. But we've got, in this particular scenario, the suspects are there. They're living there. And they're doing it blatantly in front of us. They drive on with a lorry with a registration mark and it's full of rubbish. The next day that lorry is empty. I think even I can sort that one out. I think the council should now be, you said we've got a bit of a cheap result with what we pay it to. I think we should now also be considering employing a security company the site. They are then monitored by a security company. They will log them on with a lorry load of rubble, and then they will observe what happens to that lorry load of rubble. And if they tip it off the back of that lorry, I'm afraid we've got a suspect, and we can then prosecute someone. And if we can't do it when the suspects are on that particular ground, how the hell are we ever going to do it by them dumping it 3 a.m. in a country lane elsewhere in Thurrock? Security guard, put him there, monitor them on and off, and observe it if they tip. That's the answer, because they've got to be held accountable, and we've got to get some good examples of prosecutions. And next year, I'm afraid, we can't let them get away with it, because I will raise this and raise this and raise this again. Because if we can't solve something simple like that, then what can we solve?
I'll take that on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of things, just very quicker. You talk about the public space protection orders. If we were successful in getting them, would that impact on the police's opportunity to use Section 61 powers? In other words, would they still be able to use those powers?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, so it wouldn't weaken their case?
That's a much stronger power, the Section 61 stuff, because the PSPO stuff, if you contravene the PSPO, you'll get fixed penalty notice.
Yeah, no, I just want.
Yeah, it wouldn't compromise that.
They've still got the opportunity to use the Section 61 if there's a PSPO in force.
Indeed. Yeah.
Okay, fine. That was that one point. And I notice you talk about trying to cover in the legal costs for the court action, but knowing that we know when they're going to go to court. Picking up on Councillor Cherry's point, is it not possible to get an estimate, and it may be an underestimation of the cost to clear the site, and include that in the cost of the court? We know we're not possibly going to get them, but it is something that's registered against that group then. As I was saying. And just finally, and again picking up on that point about having to have someone there to check whether they tipped it or not, and I've just suddenly thought of something. There's no reason why, if the travellers are moving onto the encampment with a van full of rubbish, that forget about whether they've tipped it or not, they can be just challenged to produce their waste transfer licence, because obviously they're not anywhere near where they live. It can't be their own rubbish. They've got to be transferring it. So rather than get them for fly tipping, we may be able to actually action them against not having a waste transfer licence. And I'm not sure whether or not that in actual fact entitles you to take the vehicle.
Seize it.
Seize the vehicle.
Yeah, they can seize the vehicle. So to go back to your first point, yeah, we'll certainly look at that. The argument about the court cost recovery is that, bluntly, there's no dispute about what that's cost. The $250 is what the court's charging us. In terms of the thinking was let's minimise any opportunity for people to start haggling about whether it's this, whether it's that. The action of having those costs against them, you wouldn't have to have very many before you racked up quite a significant sum. So the purpose was, bluntly, less about recovering the costs, more about making the Thurrock an unattractive place for them to come. But I will explore those.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much for your report, Jim. I think for far too long, Thurrock's been known as an easy touch by these travellers, and I'm glad that this year, really, we've been kicked into gear to start doing stuff. When I first came onto this committee, probably 18 months ago, when I was chair, we had the encampment that happened at Bellis Park, and before that, Lakeside. Now, they just come on that Lakeside one and done blatant damage. They broke in, they threatened people there that was washing cars. There's a car wash crew there, they threatened them, openly threatened them, and when they got on there, they ruined the football pitches, done untold damage, and then they did get moved on, and they've done the same at Bellis. Now, just recently at Springhouse Road, it's not just litter. That was human and animal waste left on that field, and I worked with the environment as to get that cleared up. So what they went round, when they cut, they didn't just cut, they cut and took away, just to clear that ground. It's disgusting the way these people treat this borough, and we live in this borough, and that's why we get so angry when we see this, and it's come to a head this year. Now, ECTU, they do what they can, but 5 days, 7 days, that's 5 days, 7 days too long when they're sitting there. I'm glad that Section 61 has been brought forward. That come apparent last year when what happened there at Bellis, and now it's been made apparent this is the one to use. Public protection orders seem to be a little bit more hard to get, so Section 61, the police now know, and they've reduced it, they've manoeuvred it so they can. It used to be 6 caravans, now it's 6 vehicles, so all the time we're using that and move them on straight away. They get the message, this is not an easy touch, this borough, anymore. So I appreciate the efforts that you're going to, but we must carry on. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, just very quickly. When you've got an encampment on private land, we're a bit stumped in terms of responding to it ourselves. Well, we can't deal with it. So, certainly the Lakeside one, the big Lakeside one, was an example of that. So we work with the landowners, but it's their pace. They actually have got much greater powers. They can get bailiffs in a drop of a hat that within the half an hour and get them moved. They don't have to go through the time frames we have to go through, which are set down by law. so those timescales are not negotiable from our perspective. That's the fastest we can do it in accordance with the law. But I do understand precisely the point you make. In terms of human excrement, I've been at a meeting with senior police officers where they say that in itself justifies Section 61. So there's been a bit of I'm not being disrespectful to my colleagues in the police, but they see far more the way that members and local residents see the problem, and the evidence of that is as in the report. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Chair. And I echo the sentiments of Councillor Jones, because I was part of that clean-up as well from the Corringham Recreation Ground. Just a couple of quick things. Another thing, a good deterrent. If you take a registration number of one of the vehicles and you go onto the DVLA website, you soon find out within minutes whether they're taxed or not. And if they're not taxed, they're unlikely to be insured. Perhaps if we just made that a regular feature of what we do as well, that would actually drive them off the road. And was there? This is also a county-wide problem, isn't it? And there was talk about making a fixed site somewhere, where if they rock up anywhere, we can move them on straight away, saying there's already a site for you at X place. Is anything being done about that place?
Yes, it is. In terms of police use of their computers and identifying vehicles that are complying with the law, that's something we've really urged them to do, and there's evidence of that happening far more than it used to. In terms of sites, that's a bit out of my world, I have to say. There is something about transit sites that, and I stand to be corrected, so I'm not confident about this point, but I think if it's in Thurrock, we can only refer people to transit sites within Thurrock. We can't just refer them to some else outside the borough. So the key point then is, can we identify a transit site in Thurrock? But as I say, I'm probably not the best person to respond to that point.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks very much. So I think we'll look to wrap this one up then. Are members happy with recommendations? First of all, 1.1, that we look to expedite those legal deterrents. 1.2, that we proceed with the target hardening subject to funding. And then 1.3, that we note the progress made in this report. Thank you very much. So we will move on then to item number 9, the Environmental Enforcement Report. That's found on page 75 of the pack, and I think Sue is going to introduce this one.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So I'll keep it brief then, giving the time. The report you have here tonight is really a covering report for the report in Appendix 1, which is the report that's going to Cabinet next week, as the closeness of the meetings have made the timing on this quite difficult. So any comments you have on the report in Appendix 1 tonight, we'll take that back and feed that through verbally at Cabinet next week. Basically, a report went to Cabinet back in July on the Council's role around and the actions that we were doing around environmental enforcement, and officers were tasked to go away and do some further work and come back with an update report in December. So that's what the purpose of the report to Cabinet next week is about. I won't go through all the details of it. I assume that you've read it. I guess one thing I should mention is we were specifically tasked at the July committee to look at how we could improve our enforcement work and actually enhance the work of the enforcement team we have, because I think, as you know, it's only a team of 2 people currently. So to that end, we actually brought an options paper to this committee back in October, where we put forward a number of different ways we could possibly do that, and took comment back from you on that. And the recommendation that you gave us was to go with the private company option of commissioning a private company to come in and do some issuing of FPNs, and that was mentioned earlier tonight by Steve. So we have gone away since then and commissioned that company, and they're in Thurrock. They started this week. They actually have been sort of wrecking the area, doing a bit of training, and tomorrow they actually start on the ground issuing the FPN. So that work has progressed, and as you suggested, we've commissioned it on the basis of a 12-month pilot. So we'll review it partway through and decide how we then want to continue after the 12-month period. So that will be a pilot issuing initially FPNs around littering and dog fouling. Funny, just the other thing to mention on this report is whilst the report does an update on quite a lot of good work that's been done over the past 6 months, it does recognise that there's more work that we could do around this area. There's a number of different areas of enforcement across the council, teams working around in different environmental issues, and I think we need to look at how those different teams work together and indeed how we work with some of our partner agencies as well. So what this report then suggests is that we start to develop a strategy around how we deal with enforcement across the borough of all these different issues, and we bring that report back later in the new year. So that's kind of where I'll leave it for now.
Thanks very much for the report, and I think certainly again I will welcome this. As you say, this is something that committee discussed at length in our previous meeting. I think we were all keen to make sure that action was being taken on the issue across the borough. I think it's good to see that recommendation's been taken up and taken forward, and I hope that everyone here will support that action this evening. I think clearly at the last meeting we had several points that we discussed where we, I guess in some sense, reserved judgment on the effectiveness of this as an approach, but we're very happy for that 12-month trial to come forward, and we all hope that is successful in terms of providing results. I think I would just echo again what I said last time, that I would like to see as part of that review whether or not it's a service that we could run in-house, and whether or not there's an opportunity there. But I'm very happy that this is coming forward, and I hope to see the results stemming from this in very, very short order. So with that, I'll open it up to the committee if anyone else wants to come in.
It's not so much a question as a comment. I agree wholeheartedly with Chair Councillor Gerrish that it's very good to see this coming on board, and it's really the proof the pudding is in the eating. We'll see where we are in 12 months' time of how well it's worked. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. It talks about in here about the fines not being issued to people under 18. Is that a legality, or is that where we've drawn the line? The only reason I ask is, and I can understand why they shouldn't be necessary, but probably the 15 to 18-year-old group, bear in mind you've got the college over there, could be some of the biggest culprits. So, and I've only got 3 questions, so perhaps if you can do it more at the same time. So, yeah, is that illegal that we can't go below, or is that something that we've set and we could change if need be? I noticed in 3.2.4, I think it might be a typo, because you say one of the teams is concentrating on Grace High Street, and I think hopefully that should be Grace Town Centre and not just the High Street. On page 86, regarding someone that appeals, it says that if they appeal on the 14th day, extra time will be sent out. They will give extra time to pay the fine. That's on page 86. No, it's not the same report. Yeah. And I'm just waiting. It says 14 days. If it basically it reads to me that if you receive it on the last day of the 14 days they've got to appeal, you'll give them extra time. But if you receive it on the 10th and don't respond to them to the 15th day, they will, in actual fact, will have had to pay the fine that they're appealing before. If you see what I'm saying, so can it be 14 days from the time that you've sent out your decision, rather than?
Play that again.
Can they be given 14 days to pay from the date that they have been given your decision on their appeal? Because at the moment it reads as though they'll only get that if you receive their appeal on the 14th day of the time they've got.
That's just saying that's the latest that they could appeal by, and they will get that extra time if they appeal. That period is 14 days, they'll get that further time.
Right, okay, I'll write it. And just finally, this is all about penalising the people that drop litter, I think, and that's come up with the report earlier on from the Thames group. I'd like to see whether or not there's some way that the wardens can possibly reward youngsters children, 7, 8, 10, that are quite often with parents, and I quite often see them where the parents actually ask the kids to go over and put the litter in the bin, or they go over, and even if it's just a little badge or a little sticker that they can stick on them. But I think some way of making you can't give it to a 14-year-old, but if you can instill that sense of, I've done something right in them at an early age, that could actually bring it along later on. So if we can have, as I say, some sort of, and it makes the warden look good, because not only is he seen berating someone, he's actually seen congratulating someone as well. So perhaps something you could think about.
Okay, taking the last point first, then I think that's something we could look at. And if you look at the front page of the report at 2.1, we are sort of saying that this is just one part of a whole approach to trying to improve the environment, and part of that is about an education programme as well. And I think, working with young people is a way forward on that anyway, so we can certainly look at that. In terms of the under 18s, it's not actually a legal issue, that was a choice that we made, but you did specifically ask us at the last committee when we came to talk to you about this, is not to use young people within it. So that's something that we've chosen to do, so it can always get reconsidered later on if that's what we want to do. We were very conscious of the college when we made that decision, and the fact that we're going to have sort of 17-year-olds sitting outside smoking, and technically we won't be able to issue FPNs to them. But I mean, hopefully when they see it's happening elsewhere around the Grays Town Centre, then that perhaps is a bit of a lesson for them to learn. But it is something that we can come back to. It's not actually a legal requirement as such. And you're right, yes, it is Grays Town Centre, not just Grays High Street for that bit. Okay, yeah. And I think the other one I've answered already. Yeah, okay.
It was very much the same question my colleague asked you, and you did actually answer it by saying education is going to be the way of dealing with the shortfall of those committing this offence under the age of 18. Yes, I think we did forget that one, didn't we? We let them off the hook a bit, the 17-year-olds, because they're old enough to prosecute, really. You mentioned education as a way of tackling those people. How's it actually going to work? Any more plans?
I think what we need to put in place is a whole different programme of activities. So we work with community groups, we work with groups like we've had here this evening to help us maintain a clean and tidy environment. We use that as a way of showing other people how to behave. We actually start to have an education campaign. We have things on the website. We have our campaigns like we've got up there, the Bin It one, that starts to tell people that it's wrong, that it's not acceptable, and actually, we've all had enough and we don't want this to happen anymore. And actually, that most good citizens in the borough actually don't want to see people littering, fly tipping, allowing their dogs to foul the streets, etc. So there's about a whole campaign and communications programme we need to put in around to highlight the work we're doing, and that we will take action if people, do the wrong thing, if you like.
Thanks very much, everyone. I think just picking up the point on ages there, I think when we fed back originally as a committee, I think we had kind of toddlers in our minds rather than sixth form students. I wonder if, the report tonight gives us scope to kind of verbally feedback to Cabinet. I'd certainly be happy for us to include that in our comments to Cabinet to say actually, it's the committee I think is minded to, and you made the point there, Terry, to include sort of at least 15 to 18-year-olds within that age group that we do look to include within any activity. So if the committee is kind of keen to make that suggestion to Cabinet, we can put that forward. Terry, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I'm conscious that we could be causing ourselves a problem if we try to enforce that rigidly, purely for the fact that there could be a lot of people that are doing it, and you've only got 2 enforcement officers trying to do it, and it could inflame certain situations. But at least for a trial period, if we can at least approach them and warn them, or even if it was like a dummy fine or a dummy ticket, which they would probably throw on the floor, I don't know, but I'm saying that they should be. I think they should be made aware that we're conscious of what they're doing and what they're doing isn't right, and possibly at a later stage, within 3 months or whatever it is, look at doing something about actually including them in the fine.
Thanks, Terry. I mean, I think in that case, let's sort of take it forward to Cabinet that there's a range of kind of views on the opinion about this, and that there are other options open to Cabinet in terms of the age ranges where this might be enforced, and that's something that they may want to consider as they move through with their deliberations. Great, thank you. So in that case, are we then happy to agree recommendation 1.1?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We move on then to the Council Spending Review update at item number 10, found on page 93 of the agenda. And I think for this we're going to turn to Finance and Carl to present.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the report in front of you, it just updates on the current MTFS position, also the budget gap as it currently stands, and the mechanism for how we're going to address that budget gap over the coming 3 years. The table at the top of page 94 summarises the overall position. So as at February 2016, we're looking at a 3-year gap of just over 18.4 million. We've since reviewed the assumptions around that, looking at business rate appeals, inflation factors, potential interest rate changes around capital financing over the 3 years. And we're now looking at an overall gap of 20.9 million. And of that, for next year, 17-18, we've got about 7.5 million of that. That figure already includes previously agreed savings of 2.84 million, but it also assumes that council tax will go up by 3.99% each year. There's a table further down the bottom of page 94 that just shows the impact of not increasing council tax by that level, so that gap would actually grow further. The way we're going to address that, or we are addressing that, the council spending review, we're looking at various strategic boards which are looking at different drivers around, say, procurement, property, generating income and being more commercial, and reviewing all service areas. So the 3 main focus areas are income generation, achieving more or the same for less, and looking at demand. So if we can start to manage or reduce demand before it hits us in some of those more demand-driven services to manage the expenditure. Just over the page, there are 3 specific proposals around the services that this scrutiny committee are concerned with, primarily around the income generation part. So we're looking at trade waste, expanding the offer, generating additional income by providing a more commercial-based service, selling our grounds maintenance service, primarily to schools, but could be other public sector organisations. And we've also got another 25,000 around the waste disposal contracts, which come up for renewal next year. So looking at a small saving around negotiation there. Where we currently stand, we've got a gap of about 1.3 million still for next year. Part of that is looking to increase our general fund balances by 420,000. We've only got 8 million. They are low, broadly speaking, in terms of the coverage that gives us. So we're looking to increase our balances over the next 3 years, but we've still got a gap of 1.3 going into next year, which we're actively working to try and close. We do have some general savings or proposals around agency staff, the use of consultants, and also fees and charges, which is the next item on the agenda. So we're looking at not stopping consultant agency spend, but looking to be more effective in how we actually use that and when we use that, and trying to control some of those costs. So that's where we are overall. We are working towards the budget going to Cabinet and Council in February, as usual, to agree the position for next year.
Thanks very much for that. I'm just going to pick up some of the individual proposals first of all. And I just want to make sure that we all have a kind of a clear understanding of what those management action proposals are that are taking place. So first of all, trade waste year-on-year growth. That's us expanding the offer. That's us essentially bringing more revenue into the council. Secondly, trading our grounds maintenance services. We're selling that then more broadly, and again bringing more revenue into the council. and then finally waste disposal contract negotiations. And I'm assuming here that is us buying the same services cheaper rather than a reduction in services.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So, I mean, all of those, I think, hopefully things that everyone will agree with in terms of actions. I guess the follow-up then is that looking at our spending review timetable and thinking about kind of the £1.3 million spending gap that we've still got, clearly the committee hasn't had sight of any other kind of proposals that might come forward in the cleaner, greener, safer sphere. So I guess, should we expect any other proposals to come before us to close that 1.3 million gap? And if so, if they are sort of going to Cabinet in January to start looking at those proposals, when do we expect to review those as a committee?
In terms of the gap for 17-18, I don't anticipate there being any further saving proposals coming forward at this point. It's going to be more around how we can manage that, potentially by doing some one-off things financially to get us through. However, we are looking at the 3-year horizon, and obviously we've still got a significant gap over that 3 years, so I expect there will be, it's an ongoing process, so there will be potential for future savings, further savings that are required within the services within the committee's remit. But I don't anticipate any new savings coming forward at this point for 17-18.
Thank you for that. I think that's quite encouraging then, in terms of our ability to go through those options before they do go forward as proposals. Does anybody else want to come in on this agenda item then? Yeah. Roy?
Thank you, Chair. Many thanks for your report. Trade waste, how do we compare with competitors on price trade waste? We're trying to build this part of our make-up up, so are we good price-wise, do you think?
Hello, yes.
Thank you. Just a little follow-up, please. Thanks very much for that. Business rate appeals, how long does this go on for? Do we know?
I couldn't say here and now how long it would go on for. It depends what appeals come in.
Is there a time frame by government to say that's when you've got to get this all in, or how long is it going on? I mean, I keep hearing it all the time, business rate appeals, and I just wonder how long it goes on.
I don't know. I'm not a business rates expert in that sense. I'd imagine there are timescales and timelines that have to be followed, but I couldn't give you a definitive answer right now. I could find out.
I don't think I've got much more to add in terms of background, but I think there's two issues. One is the backlog of appeals that we've been dealing with over a number of years that we're having to catch up and address, which is one issue. The second is appeals can be made, I'm pretty sure, anytime anybody wants to make an appeal. We have to deal with it and deal with the consequences of it. But we'll get a fuller answer for you on that, so that you've got the complete picture.
So is there a date, Steve, when it's finalised? You can't... Does it just go on and on?
I don't know. We'll come back to you. Sorry, Councillor.
Thanks very much. So, if there aren't any other kind of points, we're asked to do two things in recommendations. First of all, we are asked at 1.1 to note the revised MTFS position and the spending review approach and timetable. And secondly, at 1.2, that we comment on those proposals, and again, as they are largely revenue generating or buying contracts more cheaply, I would take it that the committee generally are favourable on that approach. Thank you. So are we happy to agree those recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Those are agreed. So we move on then to item number 11, the fees and charges pricing strategy 2017-18, and that's at page 107 of the agenda packs.
I'll just briefly introduce the report itself. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at the appendix. There are many fees and charges, so I won't go through line by line. However, this is the annual process in terms of determining our fees and charges for next year, for 17-18. As part of this process, as part of our way of dealing with the budget gap, as part of the MTFS, we do have an income target council-wide. There is a £350,000 additional income expectation as a result of reviewing fees and charges. The table within this report, which shows for this scrutiny committee, the part of that 350 is actually 56,000. There's a number of services within this remit, including sports bookings, waste, burials, libraries, the theatre, registrars, quite a long and varied list. And as part of the process for reviewing those charges, we've been looking at how we compare with other authorities, where we're trading, how we compare with competitors, are we recovering our costs, do we actually have the authority and the ability to increase those charges? Some are set by legislation, some of that statutory basis, others are more discretionary, and we've got a bit more scope. And also looking at inflationary impacts in terms of those charges. So I won't go through each individual one. I'm sure there's many questions around different parts of the report, so I'll hand over to questions.
Thanks very much for that. Just before we get into sort of more detailed questions, I just wanted to ask a question on page 149 and 150. And I just wanted to check that what's being proposed, and let's take page 149 first of all as an example. Fourth item from the bottom, private hire operations having 11 to 20 vehicles, 5 years. What's listed here is an increase from £500 to £3,690. And then over the page at 150, operations having more than 21 vehicles, 5 years. What's listed is an increase from £1,000 to £4,590. I just wanted a bit of clarity on those figures.
Yeah, I mean, those figures relate to, there was a move last year after the original council fees and charges lists were published. We went from an annual licence fee for private hire operators to a 5-yearly fee. So, albeit there was no 5-yearly fee set at that time, so that first column needs to be reflected to show that there was no fee at that time. So effectively it went from £1,000 for 1 year to nearly £5,000 for 5 years. So there isn't a massive jump, but it's just, I think we just need to adjust that first column.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that'd be really useful just in terms of showing what that change is practically for people kind of paying those charges, that it isn't that kind of huge jump across 5 years from what they would have been paying. My next question then comes back to I guess the Thameside Theatre in particular, and we call out a number of changes that are made, some of which clearly seem pretty logical in terms of the increases that are listed. Others, I think, are slightly more of a concern in terms of the impact that would have. And I'm going to call out particularly the point that's kind of noted in the report, that the performance charge is increased by some 60%. I guess two questions around that. First of all, what we think the impact of that is likely to be. I mean, I know we talk about offsetting the impact over at least 18 months in terms of the way that's booked, but I guess also that's still kind of over the longer term quite prohibitive. Well, it's quite a kind of a big headline rate increase. So I guess, have we explored other options around phasing that change in pricing over a longer period of time, or have we looked to see whether or not it's feasible to make up that kind of revenue elsewhere? Thanks. Do we have a sense of kind of how much extra income then that particular increase gets us? Are we talking about a significant sum of money that gives us, or actually is it relatively small in the scheme of things?
That's better. It does give us an increase in income. It's not a huge proportion of the income coming into the theatre, as you can see from the higher charges and so on and so forth. There's other costs that are incurred by anyone hiring the theatre for a performance. So I can't say that it's the majority of the income or anything like that, but it is nevertheless a proportion.
Thanks. I mean, I think the feedback from me on this one is I'd just like kind of Cabinet to think kind of carefully on this point and to take the feedback that if there are other options available, such as spreading that increase over a longer period of time or looking to make that revenue up elsewhere, I think I'd quite like to see those options explored, just to make sure that if it is, if it's not a significant portion of total revenue, that we're not kind of shooting ourselves in the foot over an increase. So I think that it would be good to kind of explore that point in a bit more depth. And with that, I'll open up to the floor. Gary, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just out of interest, on what criteria do you base these charges? For example, I'm looking at page 135, explosives regulations. 5 years renewal, no separation distances apply, £423, and yet if you're running a lorry, some lorries, it comes to about £5,000 over 5 years, or £1,000 a year. Can you give us an idea of what's the thinking behind this, please?
That figure is actually a statutory set figure, so it's prescribed by the legislation as to what you can charge, in particular to that particular fee. Generally, the sort of fees and charges, where they're discretionary, we've got like a cost recovery model. So there's lots of case law around at the moment that saying that for sort of licences and other sort of permits, you can't charge more than it costs you to administer the scheme and ensure compliance with the scheme. As I say, there's some sort of significant case law that's gone on at the moment with Westminster Council and Hemmings around sex shop licensing, which has had an impact on things. But all the fees and charges, certainly for the public protection team, have been set on a sort of a cost recovery model where we can. Things like the alcohol and entertainment licensing fees, they're prescribed by the legislation, and at the moment we don't recover the costs of what it costs us to provide the service. The government have indicated that at some point we will be able to set a locally set fee for that, so the hope is that at some point in the future we can become cost recovery on those parts.
Thank you.
Yeah, just been through them. The taxi licences have now been explained because I wasn't quite sure how that was working out either. But I do know there's a couple of them gone down. But no, I'd just like to comment that I'm pleased to see that section 12.4 that you've only removed the middle band of the hiring for the Thames side, or sorry, building in the commercial tariff. There's now two arms, and you've recognised to charge less to non-commercial operations like the arts and that for the same. So I'd just like it noted that it's appreciated that distinction has been maintained.
Thanks very much. If there aren't any other comments then, the recommendations are that the revised fees and charges proposals are noted, and that we comment on those proposals, and that those comments are passed on. And I think the comments have been noted down and will be moved on. So if we are happy to agree those recommendations, thank you very much. Those are agreed. We move then to the final item on the agenda, which is item number 12, the work programme. That's set out page 169 of the agendas this evening. You can see there that we are due to meet again on the 9th of February, and I understand there's just one item that may be added, which is libraries. And if everyone's happy to have that report added to the agenda at the meeting on the 9th of February. I'll take that as a yes, thank you very much. And with that, I will draw the meeting to a close just before 9 o'clock, and thank you very much everyone for attending this evening.